You've probably noticed that the more spiritual content gets popular, the more empty and repetitive it becomes. Everywhere you turn, you're told to breathe deeply, focus on gratitude, and raise your vibration, as if that alone could set you free. Yet if you've paid close attention, you've sensed that something doesn't add up. You feel the pull towards something deeper, but no matter how much you try the popular techniques, they never lead you to the root. That's because the real path, the one the ancient teachers followed, was buried long ago. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't soft. It was dangerous, difficult, and hidden on purpose. This video is not for comfort. It's for truth, real truth. And once you hear it, you'll understand why. No joke, it might get erased. 1. Spirituality was never meant to be peaceful. It was meant to be dangerous. The kind of spirituality that's sold today has been designed to keep people calm, distracted, and harmless. It focuses on staying positive, avoiding conflict, and finding peace at any cost. However, the original path of inner growth looked nothing like that. In fact, it was filled with discomfort, sharp realizations, and complete transformation. The truth didn't come to make you feel better. It came to break the parts of you that were fake. Moreover, true spiritual practice meant destroying the false structures you built around yourself, not protecting them. Every real transformation required a kind of inner death, where old beliefs, fears, and identities had to be burned to the ground. This wasn't easy, and it wasn't supposed to be. Then, after that collapse, something stronger could finally rise. Something that came from truth, not from survival tactics. Furthermore, those who followed this path didn't seek comfort. They sought clarity. They accepted that they would lose friends, lose their sense of certainty, and even lose parts of themselves that were once sacred. That's why this knowledge was hidden. It was never meant for everyone. It was meant for the few who were ready to pay the price for something real. 2. The God within was buried on purpose. For thousands of years, you've been taught to look up, to pray to something distant, higher, and outside of yourself. This teaching wasn't neutral. It was strategic. In contrast to what you've been told, the real power was never above. It was always within. Yet religious systems, political structures, and educational institutions work together to make you forget that fact. In addition, the more people forgot they were the source, the easier it became to control them. When you think your answers are outside of you, you keep looking for someone to follow. As a result, you hand over your choices to those who pretend to speak for that higher power. And they use that to direct your life, your beliefs, and even your emotions. Therefore, the idea of the God within had to be erased. It was too powerful. People who know they carry that kind of force don't follow blindly. They don't wait for permission. And they don't stay small. So if you've always felt like something important was being hidden, it was. And that something has always been you. 3. The secret to manifestation was hidden in ancient bloodlines. Long before modern teachings turned manifestation into a mood board exercise, powerful bloodlines used it to build entire systems of control. These families didn't talk about energy in vague ways. They practiced direct energy command. They knew how to speak, act, and move in ways that forced a certain outcome to appear. And this wasn't done through luck or hope. It was passed through generations like a coded formula, kept away from public hands. These methods included symbols, gestures, and internal states that were designed to influence the structure of reality without needing permission from anything outside themselves. Eventually, as these bloodlines solidified their empires, they began to remove this knowledge from any public access. They funded institutions, spiritual orders, and even early media to rewrite the rules of cause and effect. Instead of teaching people how to emit strong inner commands, they told them to wait, to be grateful, and to trust. Meanwhile, the original instructions were carved into secret architecture, hidden texts, and rituals passed only to the chosen few. Therefore, when someone today speaks of manifestation, they're mostly pulling from watered-down leftovers that have no real weight behind them. unless they've reconnected with the deeper codes that once built kingdoms. In truth, manifestation was never meant to be passive. It was a weapon, a tool for direction and precision. Families that survived centuries didn't rely on vision boards. They relied on alignment, sacrifice, and direct intention. And that's why the true method was buried. If people knew how powerful they were when properly tuned, the old systems would collapse overnight. So instead of showing the real process, they handed out pretty distractions. And that's the reason many people feel blocked. They're using imitation tools for a real task. 4. Meditation was never about calm. It was a portal to override reality. In today's age, meditation is often introduced as a technique for stress relief, calmness, or emotional control. However, this surface version barely scratches what ancient systems used it for. In ancient mystery schools and hidden traditions, meditation wasn't about escaping your life. It was a method for stepping into the control panel of existence. Through specific stillness, trained attention, and the shutting down of all surface impulses, people were able to enter states where external events could be influenced from the inside. This wasn't imagination or fantasy. It was execution through inner access. Furthermore, many who learned the original techniques didn't teach them widely. They understood the risk of opening that inner control to anyone who hadn't yet cleaned their inner chaos. So they kept the full methods for those who had been prepared. Over time, as these teachings spread and became diluted, the idea of meditation shifted into something soft and quiet, when in fact, it was built to be a powerful override. The moment the mind stops reacting and the senses go silent, a different layer of self takes the lead. And that self can reach through what we normally call reality. For this reason, the real fear of those in power wasn't people relaxing or slowing down. It was people breaking into the layer where commands are made. Meditation was meant to bring someone into that layer. And this is why ancient temples, sacred geometry, and chants were carefully built, not to entertain or inspire, but to bring the person into that inner room. Once inside, they could change what was outside. And this truth had to be buried. Otherwise, entire systems of control would lose their grip and would be nothing truly. 5. Soul contracts are real, and most are rigged. Throughout many ancient teachings, there are references to agreements made before birth, what some call soul contracts. These weren't optional or symbolic. They were structural. They mapped who you would meet, what struggles you'd face, and what patterns would chase you. At first glance, it seems beautiful, like a divine plan. However, once you look closer, you start to see the repetition, the loops, the pain that follows people through lifetimes. And then it becomes clear that not all contracts were made with full clarity or freedom. In fact, many contracts were formed under influence, by entities, forces, or systems that didn't want liberation, but repetition. As long as a soul remains stuck in the same wounds, the same patterns, it won't escape the cycle. Therefore, the system continues, and the person believes they're simply unlucky or flawed. These loops are not random. The same betrayals, heartbreaks, blocks, they're echoes of a script that was written long ago, and most never realize they can end it. The truth is, breaking a soul contract isn't about anger or escape. It's about clarity. Once someone sees the pattern for what it is, they begin to step out of it. The loop starts to weaken. However, most never get that far because they've been trained to normalize the suffering, to call it love or karma or destiny. But when someone wakes up, really wakes up, they stop walking in circles. They walk out. 6. Death isn't the end. It's the reset button of a trapped system. One of the most protected spiritual secrets is that death, in many cases, isn't liberation. It's a reset. Ancient texts, especially those kept in esoteric circles, speak of how the soul, after death, doesn't automatically float into peace. Instead, it often gets pulled into another cycle, memory wiped, direction changed, and put back into a new life where it starts over without knowing why. This wasn't a mistake. It was the design of a system meant to recycle energy and keep people from ever finishing the game. Moreover, this loop was maintained through control of memory. Because as long as you can't remember your past lives, your agreements, your original intention, you have no map. You accept everything around you as new and random. However, this forgetting wasn't natural, it was inserted. Through energetic interference, manipulative reincarnation structures, or deals made long ago, people have been kept spinning through timelines without ever knowing they've been here before. To make things worse, death has been glorified or romanticized as an ending, when it's actually an entry point into the same maze. And the elites, those who knew this system, didn't fear death. They feared remembering. Because once someone remembers, the maze falls apart, and that's when a soul becomes truly free. So the next time people talk about rebirth as a gift, it's important to ask, a gift from whom? 7. This one person spoke out and vanished. There was one person, long before modern systems were fully in place, who understood all of this, not through books, but through direct experience. They were born with memories still intact. They spoke of soul traps, energy commands, bloodline power, and how silence was a tool of control. At first, their message spread. People started waking up. Then suddenly, it all went quiet. Their writings disappeared. Their name was scrubbed from record, their friends silenced or turned. Nevertheless, fragments of their work survived. Through oral transmission, underground schools, and coded language, small pieces made it into modern teachings, though usually distorted. However, if you look close enough, the message still breathes. Symbols that make no sense suddenly click, rituals that seem strange start working, and texts that were once dismissed start to open. It's as if the truth wanted to survive, even if the messenger didn't. Today, some still search for their real name. Others believe they were never one person, but a group acting as one voice. Either way, the elite took them seriously, because what they knew couldn't be allowed in the open. And that tells you everything you need to know. If you have made it this far, let us know what you think in the comment section below. For more interesting topics, make sure you watch the recommended video that you see on the screen right now. Thanks for watching.